In this video, we're going to dive into the powerful time tracking features and project management tools in GitLab like issue boards, and we'll learn how to create an animated bar chart like this one that gives you a detailed breakdown of how you've allocated your time day by day. Now, the example that you see here just has 7 days, but you can extend this idea to a full year and get a really good picture of where you've spent your time. You can think of this kind of like a year in review, sort of like Spotify Wrapped, but it's for measuring what types of activities you spent your time on during the year. Of course, you can also use this technique for any time period you want, but doing this around New Year's is super fun. The GitLab side of things is based on my own experience from tracking my time over the last year and a half or so, but the Plotly code used to create the actual final product is based off a talk given by Deepsha Mangani from Microsoft, and she gave this talk at the Posit conference back in September 2023, and I really recommend checking out her talk if you're interested in creating animated bar charts. Her talk goes into a lot more details about how to make everything look really pretty and the different kinds of animated plots that you can create. But this video is really focusing on how to apply this idea to the concept of time tracking. This makes for really interesting animations at the end of the year, and I know I personally really enjoyed seeing how I spent my 2023. My name is Melissa Van Bussel, and I make videos here on YouTube about our programming and data science. If you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing to my channel so that I can keep making videos like this. To do this, I'm going to be using GitLab issue boards, which according to GitLab are a software project management tool used to plan, organize, and visualize a workflow. It also says here that you can use it as a Kanban or a Scrum board, and the way that I use it personally is kind of like a Kanban board, and then I'm pairing that with their issue tracking features as well as their time tracking features. And these boards are a great way to visualize your to-do lists, keep track of the status of the different things that you're working on, and see how long each type of task is taking. I've already logged into my GitLab account, so I'm going to start by creating a new project. And you can only have one issue board per project, so I recommend creating a new project specifically for your time tracking purposes. I'm going to create a blank project, and I'll call this time tracking. I'm going to put it under my personal namespace. And for the visibility level, I'm going to set this one to public, since I'll share the link to all of this in the video description. But for your own purposes, you might wish to set this to private, especially if you are tracking your time and you don't want other people to see all of that personal information. But I'll set mine to public so that anyone watching this video can see exactly how all of the issues and the issue board looks like. I'm not going to give it a README, and I'm going to create the project. Next, I'm going to decide on some custom labels for my issue board. This part is more for the project management aspect than it is for the time tracking, but I find it really nice to combine those two workflows together. I go to Manage and then Labels, New Label, and these can really be anything that you want, but the ones that I typically use are To Do, In Progress, and Done. And I like to make the colors red, yellow, and green. Green means I'm totally done, red means I haven't even started yet, and yellow means I'm currently working on it. For the first label, that one's called To Do. I'm going to select red, create a new label. This one is In Progress, and I'll make that yellow. And for my third and final label, I'll call this one Done, and I'll make that green. And now we have these 3 labels, and we're ready to create our issue board using these labels. Go to Plan, and then Issue Boards. Then I'm going to click on New Board, and I'll give this a name. I'm going to use this for my to-do list, and I'm going to uncheck the open and closed list. That's because I already created custom labels myself, so I don't need things to be grouped based on this sort of default sorting. One thing to note is that the closed list is basically the exact same thing as what we were trying to create with that green label called Done. Really, you can go with either option. I prefer creating the custom label for it because I like having the different colors on my issue board. And I can't do that if I just leave it as the default list name, which says closed. Then I'm going to create the board, and then I'll click on create list, and I'll use the drop down to select the color that I want to add, create list again, use the drop down again, and finally create list one last time and put the last category on there. And this is what my issue board looks like so far. If you put them on in a different order, you can also drag things around very easily. And this is the base for the project management part. Now let's take a look at the time tracking aspect. There's many different ways that you can do this, but I'll show you the way that I've been using for the last year and a half. And this is a method that I've found has worked really well for me. I've made a lot of changes to it over time, and I find that this strikes the right balance of having the right amount of information and it not taking too long to manage all of it and to get the summary statistics at the end. I'm going to go to milestones, and then I'm going to create a new milestone. And these milestones are going to define the categories that we saw in the original animation. So this is the highest level of category. And I'll create a few examples. These are all just made up. So you'll definitely want to pick better categories for whatever it is that you actually do day to day. But here are some examples of how you might categorize the type of work that you do as someone who works with data. The first milestone that I'm going to create is data cleaning. There's also other awesome features on here like start date and end date. You can also add a description, and it accepts Markdown as a format. So you can add things like bold text, italic text, images, links, and so on. But since I'm just using this for time tracking purposes, I'm just going to leave this as is. I'm going to create that milestone. Going back to the page from before, I'm going to create another milestone. This one is going to be exploratory data analysis, or EDA. Create milestone, new milestone, let's say data visualization, another milestone. I'll call this one report writing. And then I'll create one last category for administrative tasks, for example, meetings or sending emails. And for this example, I think these 5 categories will be sufficient. I'm going to go back to my issue board by going to the project homepage and then plan and then issue boards. I've still got this default development board here. I'm going to go ahead and delete that one because I want the board that shows up to be the custom one that I created. So now when I come to this page, it's automatically going to go to the correct issue board. And now it's time to actually create some issues. And this is where you can have your lower level breakdown of tasks. And this is really going to depend on the exact project that you're trying to track your time for. But for example, let's say that you're trying to track the way that you spend your time for an entire month. And maybe you have 3 different sub projects that you're working on in that month. Then you might create different issues for each of those sub projects. Or maybe one of the milestones can be further broken down into other subcategories. For example, that administrative tasks milestone might be useful to break it up into things like emails and meetings, or even the time that you're spending on project management. Let's start with that one as an example. I'm going to go ahead and create a new issue under the in progress label on my issue board by clicking this little plus button. And then I'm going to call this one meetings. I'll create the issue, and then more options are going to pop up on the sidebar. I'm going to assign this to a milestone, and meetings should go under administrative tasks. You can also add things here like assignees. This is really useful if you're working on a team and you need to know who's working on what. But because this is just for my own personal time tracking, I'm going to be the one doing all of these issues, so I'm not going to add any assignees anywhere. You can also set a due date, and right here is where we have our time tracking features, and we'll get to that in just a moment. I'm also going to add one for emails, create that issue. Again, we're going to put that one under the administrative tasks milestone. And let's say I'm already partway through one of these projects for the month. So I've already completed my data cleaning for one of my projects. So I'm going to create an issue, and let's say it's for cleaning the Palmer penguins data set from R, create that issue, and I'm going to assign that to the milestone of data cleaning. Let's say I'm done cleaning that data set, but currently I'm working on creating a nice plot for that data set. So that's going to go under my in progress. I'm going to create that issue, and this milestone is going to be for data visualization. And under to do, I'm going to need to write a final report about the Palmer penguins based on what I find in my exploratory analysis and in my visualization. So this one is going to go under to do because I haven't started that one yet. I'm going to create that issue and then add that to the report writing milestone. In this example, I'm partway through my analysis for this Palmer penguins data set, but let's say I've also got this other sub project on the side, and that one I haven't even started yet when I'm creating this issue board. So I'm going to put all of the items for that other project under the to-do portion of my issue board. Let's say this one is all about the MT cars dataset, which is also a dataset in R. I'm going to repeat the same steps as before, can create a bunch of issues and then assign them to the milestones that make sense for the time tracking. So cleaning the MT cars dataset is going to go under data cleaning. Explore the MT cars dataset goes under EDA. Create visualization goes under data viz. And creating a final report will go under report writing. And I can also put these in order of when I'm working on them. So I'm probably going to finish this Palmer penguins project before I start the MT cars one, so I can drag that right up to the top of that list. And I can also put these ones in order of what makes sense. First, I'm going to clean it, then I'm going to explore it, visualize it, and then write the final report. This is a really great way to visualize your to-do list, but then also you can now track how much time you spend in each of these different subcategories as well as those higher level milestones. Let's pretend that this is for the month of December 2023. For myself personally, I usually create an issue board for the entire year because it makes a really cool animation when I can see where I spent my time every single day for 365 days. It just looks really cool, but for this example in this video, I'm just going to do it for a week because otherwise it would take way too long to enter in all of this information. This is usually something that I do as I go. So I might spend a couple minutes a day categorizing where I spent my time. I definitely don't want to enter 365 in here for this example. So I'll just show how to do it for 7 days, but then you can extend this idea to a month or a year or whatever timeline makes sense for you. Right now it's December 28th, 2023. So for this example, I'm going to pretend that I'm doing the time tracking for this week, which would be December 24th to December 30th. Hopefully people are enjoying the holidays and not doing work right now. This is just an example, of course. Now, if today is December 28th and I was starting the time tracking on December 24th, and this one is already done, then that means that I must have spent the time before today. I'm going to click on this issue, and then under time tracking, I'll click this little plus button to add a time entry. And let's say that on the first day, day 1, I spent most of my day doing this. I spent 7 hours on the data cleaning, and for each of these 7 days, I'm going to add in 8 hours worth of time. Of course, none of these time estimates are realistic. This is just an example. Let's say that the last hour for the first day was spent on going to meetings. I'll add that time entry under meetings, and that's 8 hours for day 1. Moving on to day 2. Day 2 would be December 25th. Let's say that I spent 5 hours on that, and then I spent 1 hour going through my emails and 1 hour going to meetings. That's 8 hours for day 2. Let's say it's now day 3, and I'm going to be starting on writing this final report. I actually finished the data visualization, so I can drag that over to the done column. It automatically updates that label there. And then let's say we're starting on that final report. I drag that over as well, and the label also gets updated there. Now let's say day 3, I spent majority of this day working on that final report. Let's say it was 5.5 hours on day 3. And let's pretend this was a really email heavy day. This was 2 hours on the 26th. And the last half hour of the day was spent in meetings. That's 0.5 hours on the 26th. And you get the idea from here. I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest of the time tracking for these issues such that there was 8 hours a day spread across all these issues. And I just realized that spent can't be at a future date and time. And since I already went and entered all those other times, what I'm going to do for those last 2 days that are in the future, which is December 29th and December 30th, I'm just going to enter those as the week before, which would be the 22nd and the 23rd, just so that GitLab is going to let me enter the information. And then when I'm using R to do the analysis of the time tracking information after, I'll just change the 22nd and the 23rd back to the dates that they're supposed to be for this example. I've now finished entering in all of the fake time tracking information. So now it's time to visualize the results. Before we do that, we can take a look at each of these milestones and we can see the high level information for the time tracking. Here I can see that across these 2 issues, I spent 10.5 hours on the administrative tasks milestone. But if I want to see the detailed breakdown, including the dates and how much time I spent on the different types of issues within the milestone, then unfortunately I have to click on the time tracking report for each individual issue. If I go back to the issue board and I click on emails, for example, the way that I can see the full detailed breakdown is by clicking on this time tracking report. And this gives me a more in-depth breakdown, and it shows me who spent the time and on what day, rather than just telling me the overall total amount of time. So if I want to properly visualize this using R, this means that I'm going to need to copy and paste the time tracking report for every single issue on my issue board into a CSV. For this reason, I really recommend keeping the overall number of issues on your issue board small if you're planning on doing any kind of data analysis on your time tracking information where you need the dates as one of the variables. Technically, you can also use the GitLab API to access your time tracking information, but even if you do that, it's still only going to give you the high level total number of hours that you spent on any issue rather than giving you the itemized breakdown that shows the date and time for every single entry. This is why I copy and paste everything into a CSV. Now, this might sound like it would take a lot of time, but if you've been keeping the number of issues small, then it's a pretty small time investment, especially if you're only doing this like once a year or something like that. I'm just going to click on each issue and then go to the time tracking report, and I'm going to copy and then paste into a spreadsheet. I'm going to create columns here, date, user, time spent, and I'm also going to create a variable called milestone. And I just add these manually. These first 2 lines here were for data cleaning. Again, this sounds like it would take a really long time, but if you're keeping the number of issues and the number of milestones small, it's really not that long to do this sort of analysis. You can just type it and then drag it down if you have any issues that have a lot of time entries in them. And in order to make that a little bit easier, what you can do is enter the info based on the milestones. So if I go to data cleaning, there's 2 issues there. I already copied the time tracking report for the first one, and this is the only other issue under data cleaning. So I can go to the time tracking report here, and now I know that I'm done the data cleaning milestone. I can even close this milestone if I know that I'm done with this. Now there's only 4 milestones remaining. Next, let's go to the administrative tasks one. First up is the emails issue. Can copy and paste all of that. Now, if you wanted to retain that subcategory information, you could, of course, create an additional variable, such as issue, and then these ones would all say email, for example, and this would say administrative tasks. For my purposes, I don't really care about keeping the lower level information, so I'm not going to add that column, especially because I can still get that information back anytime I want just by going to the issues on GitLab itself. And the second issue under administrative tasks was meetings. Copy and paste the time tracking report. And now I'm done 2 out of the 5 milestones. I'll close this one, go back to milestones, and just keep repeating until you're through every single issue and milestone. And now I have this spreadsheet. I'm going to export this to a CSV, and I'll save that to my computer. Now I'm going to open up RStudio and create a new R script because it's time to visualize our results. First, I'm going to load in the CSV file, and this is what it looks like. There's a little bit of cleaning that we're going to need to do here. First is we'll need to get the dates into an actual date time format, and we'll also need to convert the time spent. We're going to load the tidyverse to deal with the dates and times, and we'll use the mutate function on the time spent variable, and then we're going to use the period function from the lubridate package to convert that time spent variable into a period of time. Now if we look at the time df, it's in a format that we're going to be able to do math with, essentially. These are now durations, which means that we can add these numbers together and they're not just strings anymore. We're also going to modify the date variable. And to do that, we're going to use the as.date function. But if we take a look at the date variable, all of the timestamps are always at the same time because we weren't actually keeping track of what hours, we were just keeping track of the date. So I'm going to take the substring of the date variable and only keep the information up until the comma, and then I'm going to get rid of everything to the right of that. So I'm going to take substring of the date variable, and we want to start at character 1, and we're going to stop right before the comma, which happens to be the number of characters in the date minus 20 characters. And then inside of the as.date function, we also need to specify the format that the date is currently in. And right now, the date is in the following format. It has the full month, which is represented by % and then capital B. Then it has the date of the month, which is %D. Then it has a comma, and then it has the full 4-digit year. And if I run that, we can see that the dates are now in a usable format. Finally, we're also going to make the milestone variable into a factor variable, and I'm going to drop the user variable since they're all the same anyways. The other thing that I had said I would do is update the entries that said December 22nd and 23rd to instead say 29th and 30th. And that was because GitLab wouldn't let me enter any time tracking information for dates that are in the future. I'm using the mutate function again. This time the date variable is going to be modified using the case when function. And if the date is the 22nd, we're going to change it to instead be the 29th of December. And if the date is equal to the 23rd, we're going to update that to say December 30th. And if neither of those scenarios are true, then we just want there to be a catch-all statement. That's why I'm doing the 1 equals 1, because that statement will always be true. And in that case, we just want to set it equal to the current value of whatever is in that date variable. Next, we're going to load the Plotly package in order to create our animated plot. And we can naively try to animate what we have so far but we'll find that it's not really going to create exactly what we're looking for. We'll pipe the data frame that we just created into the plot_lee function, and then we're going to try to add some bars to the plot, and the y variable is going to be our milestone, and we can try using the time spent variable along the x-axis, and then the thing that's going to change with each frame of the animation is going to be the date, and we'll set the IDs to the milestone, and we want this to be a bar chart. I'm going to hide the legend and then animate and specify how quickly we want the animation to happen. But if we do this, we're going to see that we don't get exactly what we're expecting. So there's still a little bit of cleaning that needs to be done here. There's two main problems. The first problem is that it doesn't really understand the dates that we have. So we're going to create a mapping for each day where December 24th is going to be set as day number 1, December 25th as day number 2, and so on, all the way from day 1 to day 7. We're going to create a start date, which you can either type out manually if you happen to know it, which we do in our case, but you can also use the min function on the date variable because it is saved as a date object. So R will understand how to find the minimum date, and then same thing with the end date. And then we're going to create a date sequence from the minimum date to the maximum date. We use the seek.date function, and then we're going to go from start date to the end date, and we're going to go in increments of 1 day. And then I'm going to create a data frame called dates as numbers, and the date is going to take the values of the date sequence vector we just created, and then I'm going to create a numeric mapping for each of those dates, and it's just going to go from 1 to the length of the date sequence. And now if we look at dates as numbers, we have one number per day that's in our data frame. Now I'm going to join this data frame to this one so that we have an additional variable on the time_df data frame saying which one of those numbers the date corresponds to. Left join onto the dates as numbers. Now let's try updating our plotly, and instead of saying that the frame is equal to the date, let's set it equal to the date number. This might help us a little bit, but we're still going to get a bit of wonky results, and that's because we need to have cumulative sums of the time rather than just one row per time entry. That way, Plotly will know how long to make each bar for every single date. And because there might be some days where we didn't code any time to certain milestones, we're also going to need to make sure that our cumulative sums incorporate that information. Otherwise, we're just going to have some days with missing information completely, and Plotly isn't going to know how to handle that. So we need to create one row per milestone and date combination. So I'm going to create a data frame that has one row per unique value of the milestone variable. And then we need to repeat that once per day in the date sequence. So this is what that looks like. There's 5 different milestone categories, and there are 7 days in total, which means 35 rows. Then we're going to sort the data frame by the milestone, and we're going to add on the date number variable so that we have something that looks like this. And now we're going to left join this data frame that we just created with the one that has all of our time tracking information so that we end up with 35 rows instead of only 20. But we're only going to keep the rows that we actually need for the animation, which is the milestone, the date number, and the time spent. Now we actually end up with 39 rows, and that's because we have some days where we have more than one time entry for the same milestone. For example, if we did both emails and meetings on the same day, then that would mean that the administrative tasks milestone shows up in here more than once. The other thing to notice is that there are some days where 0 amount of time was spent at all, and so we're going to replace those NAs with time durations of 0. I'm going to use the mutate function to replace the NAs on the time spent variable with 0 seconds, but we're going to turn that into a duration object by using the period function from the lubridate package. And now this is what we have. Any of the days where there were NAs before, now just say 0 seconds. And finally, now we can create the cumulative sums, and we're going to take this data frame that we finished cleaning, and we're going to group by the milestone, and we're going to use the mutate function to create a cumulative sum of the time spent variable. Unfortunately, when I do that though, everything showed up as a 0, and I think that's because the cumulative sum function doesn't understand the duration objects there. So I'm going to instead take the cumulative sum of as.numeric of time spent. There we go, and this now has seconds instead of hours. So maybe I'll also divide this by 60 just to make everything look a little bit nicer on the plot. Actually, I'll divide by 3600 and that'll give it in numbers of hours. Looks like that still didn't work. So let's see what happens if I run period to seconds on the time spent variable. I think what happened here is that it's seeing this as 30 months instead of as 30 minutes. So I'm going to go back up to the top, and before we use the period function on the time spent variable, we're going to replace all of the lowercase m's with uppercase m's so that it sees them as minutes instead of as months. I'm using the string replace function to replace the lowercase m's with uppercase m's. Let's rerun everything from the start, and that seems to have fixed everything. And now we should be ready to animate this plot. Instead of the time spent variable along the x-axis, we're going to change this to our cumulative sum, and we need to change this to our toPlot data frame, and this is what we get. This is only across 7 days, so it doesn't look as cool as it could look, but now we can visualize how much time we're spending on each different type of task throughout the week or the month or the year. Each day shows us the cumulative sum, and the plot is also interactive. You can press play to play the animation, or you can also hover over any of the bars to see what the current value is. Here I'm going to set the x-axis blank, but to do this I have to pass it as a list and then set the title to blank. That removed the cumulative sum label. I'm also going to remove the y-axis label in the same way, and then we can give a title. It says time tracking for December 24th to 30th, 2023. And this looks a lot better, but the title is a little close to the top, so we can add a margin to the top of the plot, again using the layout function. And it's a list, and then we say how big we want the margin to be on the top. I removed the color because it was making the animation look a little bit odd, but this is what our final product looks like. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and Happy New Year!